Hello and welcome to the Eastern Front. On our podcast, we talk about the many challenges to European peace that tend to emerge along a line running from the Baltic to the Black Sea, the Eastern Front, and about why those matter to the United States. My name is Julia Joja. I'm with the Middle East Institute, Georgetown, and George Washington Universities, and I'm joined by
Dalguru Hatch, I'm with AI.
Today, we are joined by Admiral Juhani Kaskela, who is a senior former Finnish admiral, now retired, and chief of defense of the Finnish Defense Forces until 2009. We're thrilled to have him join today. If you enjoy this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us. Admiral, thank you so much for joining us. And this is also a quick shout out to American Purpose, who you joined on a workshop recently in Berlin to talk about how we can increase support across the transatlantic space for Ukraine. We will be talking about that. But first and foremost, we want to take advantage of you being here to talk to us about Finland's defense posture and how that has adjusted following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We all watched with fingers crossed when Finland announced the change in the defense posture, wanting to join NATO, and we're thrilled to see that this process is in the making. But can you tell us a little bit more about what has led, in terms of the internal domestic debates on national security, to this discussion, how you assess this discussion within Finland, and what kind of implications are coming from that?
Thank you, Julia. I'm really honored to be here to discuss with you. Yes, the last year has been, I would say, very difficult to a news addict like myself. That so much happening, and in Finland too. When December 21, President Putin was trying to put limits on the enlargement of NATO to their borders. Of course, there are only 3 countries in the western border which are not members of the alliance, and those are Ukraine, Belarus, and Finland. And not counting Belarus here as a candidate for NATO, but Finland certainly made the decision when these limits were expressed by President Putin. So, and it was very peculiar that the Finnish nation, according to polls, right away when the invasion started, 24th February, in the next day polls, more than half of the nation wanted to join NATO, to get an extra deterrence, or I would say boost to our deterrence capabilities created mainly by our own defense. And then the rapid process led to political leadership started to discussions. The president went to Washington and to meet President Biden, and thereafter it was a very rapid process where I would say Finland dragged along also Sweden to join NATO. And now we are really on the very doorstep, and the final ratifications are to come in 2 weeks' time. So it was quite a booster, and I could actually quote here Lord Robertson, who was the Secretary General of NATO 1999-2003, and he made quite a sort of he's a very straightforward Scot, and he put it in a short statement. And it took me 4 years as the Secretary General, and I couldn't get Finland and Sweden join NATO. Then comes Mr. Putin, and it only takes 4 weeks. And that really was quite a booster to our joining West. Of course, we had been for 30 years more or less there on the doorstep, and very, I would say, trusted partner, and being actively participating in all NATO out of area operations, and of course other partnership programs as well. So Finland actually never we never lowered our shield. We were not taking any advantage of peace dividends, and of course NATO had to make their choices whether there was purpose to their operations anymore when Soviet Union collapsed and Warsaw Pact was put down. So we continued because of course during the past centuries almost every generation has been fighting against Russia or Soviet Union. So we had no illusions that we could be secure only on our own. And when the security environment so drastically changed, the decision was there, okay, we need extra boost to our defense and extra security guarantees, and then the decision was easy. We are still, if we look at the Finnish capabilities and the development of our defense, I would say that the war in Ukraine has very much confirmed that we have made earlier on in our development right decisions. If you look at the capabilities of Ukraine, how they have been able to harness all the resources of the society in putting up their reserves, with putting up their civilian infrastructure, all the assets of the society for defense of their nation. This is exactly the same formula which we have been cultivating during the past decades. We also have, if we look at the deterrence or defense and deterrence, which is now, of course, the strategy of nature, we have good tools for that. Just to mention the long-range precision weapon systems which we have acquired during the past 20 years. Take it, for example, the FA-18 Hornets, which we have 62 now. They were updated to carry JASM standoff weapon systems with a range of 400 kilometers. Then we acquired the multiple MLRS systems, the M270, with the long-range capabilities, which are actually the same rockets as the HIMARS platform uses. And now we have the capabilities for the Army tactical missile systems. So the Army will have ranges from 150 to 300 kilometers as well. So these are the sort of weapons of deterrence. And now the Navy is going to have for 8 ships Israeli Gabriel surface missiles with the capability to attack also the ground targets. So if we look at the Finnish capabilities, we are really going to take care of our own country. But in addition to that, of course, the Article 5 security guarantees are going to extend the deterrence to a new level. But really the two elements, I would say, two dimensions of the Finnish defense: large mobilizable forces, 280,000. The Army is 180,000 of that. And then these weapons of deterrence, where we can always threaten, say, the Russian infrastructure or command posts and supply lines, just like the Ukrainians are doing at the moment. So, for example, the Iskander ballistic missile systems, we decided that we are not going to cover the whole country with missile defense systems, but we are going to threaten their platforms. Now NATO, US are going to provide us with target acquisition data. We have own satellite systems as well, which we have rented one to Ukraine. They are very happy about the SAR satellite, which they are using to locate key positions of the aggressor. So I think we are going to strengthen NATO's defense in Northern Europe. Certainly, we are taking the responsibility of very long border, 1,300 kilometers, So together with Norway, we are going to be Northern Europe really frontline states, which the United States has very decisively confirmed and supported. They confirmed our position as a frontline state. So we were the first ones in Europe to get, for example, the cruise missiles for FOF-18, the standoff missile systems, after Australia. So the trust and confidence shown by the US government has been really the facilitator of our deterrence factor of our defense.
Before we delve deeper into some of these military questions that you alluded to, I was wondering if I could ask a question which is political in nature. So there's an election coming in early April in Finland, and I, like many others, have been throughout this war in Ukraine deeply impressed by the leadership shown by the Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin. I'm wondering to what extent it is true that there is really a cross-party consensus on security issues in Finland, including on Finland's attitude towards what's happening in Ukraine, and to what extent there might be uncertainties related to the outcome of the election, or whether that's something that really there is no daylight between major political parties in the country.
Thank you, Dalibor. It's amazing that security and defense are not, in a way, raised by any political parties to discussion, debates. We're going to have the election really in 10 days' time, and this is not an issue. It was more or less accepted, approved by the whole nation. When we had the parliamentary discussion and decision making on submitting our application to join NATO, out of 200 MPs, 188 supported, 8 were against, or there were a couple of which were absent about that. So, and 97% of Finns are really in favor of supporting Ukraine and the Ukraine defense. So we are overwhelmingly supporting Ukraine. So I have seen we have now the debates are every night in television, and the political parties representing their views. This is not anymore an issue that we are going to join NATO, and everybody is really in favor of supporting NATO. As you said, Prime Minister said very clearly that when she was asked, I think it was was it in Munich or wherever, but she said very decisively that when the war is going to end, when the Russians are expelled from the sovereign territory of Ukraine, and there's no sort of a opposition to these opinions at all. And now the government has actually they are in the process of delivering the 14th package of military aid to Ukraine. So it's been sort of a monthly procedure. Now the value is about 800 million euros, which we have allocated, which is in per capita sense 135 euros. I just checked in Finland, which clearly exceeds the per capita allocations by UK or US. So, but we are still running behind Estonia, which has really made enormous in their size of defense and population, quite considerable attributions.
Sir, if I could ask a couple of forward-looking questions, which may be related. First of all, how do you think Finland would like to see the alliance evolve going forward? And in particular, looking at the Arctic as a theater that's been increasingly competitive, increasingly important, and a region where Russia has been increasingly active over the last decade or more. What do you think about those two sort of looking ahead topics?
Thank you, Giselle. That's really is one of the crucial questions. When we were still, we haven't made the decision to apply NATO membership, or in this sort of a grey time zone, we were still in the process. We very much were consoled by the fact that the US bilateral relationship which we have had with the US, the United States were really sort of giving us sort of a bilateral security guarantees, as did the UK as well. Both these countries, UK and US, are very much involved in the security of the Arctic area. Finland and Norway and Sweden are all there. And we see, or I was actually, this is not from my own head, but when I have discussions with the US politicians or military, the vital US interests are there in this area. I mean, because of the sea lines of communications of North Atlantic, the Arctic as a whole, and then of course the Article 5 obligations towards Baltic countries and Poland. So we are very much in the center of this vital interest of the US, and the UK very much the same. So we were very much convinced that whatever comes, these bilateral decisions, bilateral security guarantees are really important to us. And it can be in the future as well. If the NATO decision-making process takes too long, we always can rely on US or UK help, because it's not because of our blue eyes, but because of US vital interests of their own. So in that sense, we are looking forward to have intensified Nordic cooperation combined with the US and UK contributions. And this sort of, I hesitate to say that this is a Nordic bastion. We don't want to separate ourselves from the rest of the alliance, but we can see that we have so much in common. We have, for example, we have integrated our air forces already from the beginning of 2000s. So we have the same command and control systems. We have the same recognized air picture. We have the Link 16, and we have almost weekly exercises where the squadron commander level, somebody can call from Rovaniemi to Luleå in Sweden and to Tromsø in Norway. Let's have next Wednesday a bigger exercise. And that can be seen from Murmansk, of course, that there are tens of first-rate fighters supported by UK tankers and AWACS from Germany, from US Air Force. And this is sort of a daily bread. It's been for 15 years now. So it's a part of this deterrence that they can see that actually this is by far the biggest sort of a single air force, if you put us together, 200 fighters there, F-18s, F-35s, and Gripens. And our air force is in the process of changing now from F-18 Hornets to 64 F-35s, which to a nation of our size is quite an investment.
That's a lot of money.
Part of the defense and deterrence, I would say. But clearly, this northern periphery is very important because we are overlooking the Arctic. We have the biggest formations of army as well there. One standing brigade in the north, where, by the way, at the moment there are, I think they left last week, from Alaska, a US division sent across the pole by air troops to train with us to get Arctic training from the Finnish army.
Very glad that Admiral Kaskela makes these points. I think Nordic security and interoperability is unique in the world, and it gets underrated here in Washington. And so this is kind of a thank you for highlighting not just the levels, the incredible levels of interoperability and military cooperation that existed for such a long time, but also why these things are important to, as you know, Admiral, here we have a very heated debate about what is United States national interest and whether the United States should remain involved and to what extent in European security. So your comments are very heartwarming and fit greatly into the debate that we're having here in Washington. Because your experience is first and foremost on the maritime side, I also want to take advantage to ask you about maritime security in and around Finland, in the Baltic Sea, and what kind of challenges Russia poses not just now, but in the medium and long term in your assessment. We've now learned that overall we've overestimated Russian military might, including maritime, as we've seen with great examples such as sinking the Moskva in the Black Sea. But nevertheless, Russia will remain a security threat that, as you pointed out, Finland has been painfully aware for a long time. So looking at the Baltic Sea particularly and Russia's military presence there, what do you see as the main challenges at the regional level?
Thank you, Julia. Before I really tackle your question, I will still continue from the previous, saying that at the moment, as we speak, the Finnish current chief of defense is in Norfolk, Joint Forces Command there. The president of Finland was there 2 weeks ago, and we can see sort of a maritime dimension here too. Joint Forces Command Norfolk, or should we be in NATO in the subcommand of Joint Forces Command Brunssum? And we certainly appreciate the maritime dimension. I'm not in a position to say Finnish positions here, being retired officer, but from my personal point of view, I would very much welcome that we would be in the maritime command. I mean, maritime dominated command by Norfolk, because this really the Arctic Ocean and the Baltic Sea are more or less in the same theater of war if there would be a war. The Baltic, of course, is a very constrained maritime area where we can see that the A2AD concepts are applicable. And if you look at the geopolitical situation after Finland and Sweden are members of the alliance, Russia only has Kaliningrad shoreline as well as Leningrad Oblast or St. Petersburg, really the short line, which is quite a change to what it used to be in the Cold War, from the Finnish border to all the Baltic shorelines, coastlines until Travemünde in Germany. So they were really the sea power there, which of course occasionally NATO navies contested, but otherwise they were really, they had it was Mare Sovieticum those days. Whereas today we can see that it's going to be Mare NATO, and really what the Russians could then, they could of course try to interdict our sea lines of communication in the Baltic Sea, but we have always the protection of the coastline and of course the air defense systems there. If we look at the Finland only, the Finnish Navy is going to get 4 corvettes in the multi-role corvettes with good air defense for standard missile systems, the same as the US Navy, and then these long-range surface missile systems. And we are totally dependent on sea lines of communication to Sweden, along the Swedish coast to Danish straits. 90% of our all exports and imports go by ships. So it's an island situation where we have to have a credible defense, and that means all year round. We are ice frozen. We have the only ice strengthened warships in the world, which are really capable of tackling these bad conditions, ice conditions, with the icebreaker fleet supporting. So this really means that we have to have a good A2AD bubble here to secure our sea lines of communications, and now we have the geopolitical advantages to do that.
We should probably translate A2AD for our general purpose and general interest listeners. It means anti-access and area denial, which is kind of a fancy way of saying you can hold shipping and aircraft and other things at risk with air defense systems and other land-based systems. So you can project power into the maritime and aerospace realms, but with much simpler systems, and you can take away not only the ability to project military power, but you can hold commercial shipping and other forms of international commerce, such as electronic lines of communications that may follow the seabed at risk. So it's a term of art that's been increasingly popular and an issue that's been in focus for people who follow military affairs for the last generation or so, but it remains kind of and therefore there must be an acronym for it so we can make sure that the general public doesn't understand what we're talking about, and we give the illusion of expertise where we turn a simple idea into. So I just felt the need to make the translation for the general.
Thank you, Gerald. That really was worth that. Yes.
Well, now we can say A2AD all we want without fear.
So it wasn't just the general public, but even
That's right. Impress your friends.
I who learned this new term today. I'll be slipping it into conversation at every opportunity. So, Admiral, if I may ask you, I presume that Finland, alongside other Nordic countries, have lived with the experience of having their airspace tested by Russian ballplanes on an almost daily basis for the past decade. I wonder, though, since you brought up the situation in the Baltic, to what extent we've seen, and Finland in particular has seen, similarly irresponsible behavior on the part of the Russian Baltic fleet, and how much of a threat does the Russian Baltic fleet represent?
The Baltic fleet itself is their operations are very very quiet at the moment. Of course, we follow their movements. Think of it that they only have one submarine, for example, there, and they have no sort of a landing capabilities. They have no landing force at all. The marine, or how do you say it? The Marines brigade, which they have in Kaliningrad, has been, I think, twice already desolated by the Ukrainian defense forces. So it's really very quiet on the maritime front. Of course, they keep on flying. They have their vital communications through air to Kaliningrad, and it's a very sort of a narrow international airspace. But they haven't actually violated our airspace. I think there was one last year, one violation of our sovereignty. It's kind of our airspace or our territorial waters make a bulb more or less opposite to Tallinn, and they try to squeeze there. But it's half a minute, 1 minute, but it causes problems to ourselves because we have to scramble an F-18 there and to show that we are taking care of this airspace. When I was still at the office in 2004, it was they were showing force and there were very many of these violations. I think almost 20 took place then. Then our Prime Minister went to Moscow and said that we are going to make a big fuss of all these. We hadn't actually made them public. We always went to check them, but we decided that okay, this is now an information warfare from our response, and they suddenly stopped almost totally. I met their Chief of General Staff then, who was Army General Baluyevsky, in NATO corridors. It was the Euro-Atlantic Chief Defense meeting, and I complained very much that this is not how neighbors behave to each other, and he took it seriously. He said that we're going to have a new navigation system to guide the fighters. They were mainly fighters with no transponders on, and it created, of course. Well, they were not liked, and he, I didn't find the right word. Disturbing, of course. Disturbing was the word, and it was amazing that he said that okay. I didn't know about that, and I had all the pictures and I had charts made of these violations, and then he summoned up his chief of defense of the chief of his air forces, who said that no, Russian air Force have not violated Finnish airspace. But then he went on and said that it's the Baltic Fleet Air Force. So okay, Russian anyway, and it took a disciplinary effect in there, but of course it depends on the sort of a political situations always when they want to show off something. But it's been very quiet in the Eastern Front here, and of course all their assets are down in the south. So it's from that sense it's understandable. The garrisons of the army, the standing army brigades there are very empty at the moment, and of course they have lost so many equipment. And this is why people in Finland understand that the more we support Ukrainian armed forces, the more they decimate our potential adversary here in the north. Looking at the inventories, how they are now phased out, and so Ukrainians are very much fighting for ourselves as well.
I wish you could explain that to our presidential candidates.
I wonder, before we let you go, Admiral, if you can tell us your personal understanding based on this affirmation that we all agree with here, your personal understanding of where the war in Ukraine is going. In Western leaders, from President Biden to Chancellor Scholz to President Macron, are now replicating the same kind of wording, saying we will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But it's not clear to me whether this "it" is in sync with what Ukraine defines as it, recovering all of its sovereign territory. And so from a military and strategic perspective, looking at the military aid that we are sending to Ukraine, looking at their announced counteroffensive that we're all sort of expecting in the spring and summer, how do you see Ukraine's chances of recovering some territory in the coming months?
Well, first of all, I would say that as long as it takes, that's true partially, but I would hesitate to support that line only, because the faster the Ukrainians are able to really to conquer their lands back, the better, because time is on Russian side here. If there's a sort of a wariness of supporting Ukraine in the West, and people sort of get used to this, okay, can't we stop this? And these haphazardly created peace plans and talks are not very supportive to Ukraine. So the faster the better, and that's why we should be able to leave this sort of an incremental support approach to Ukraine in the West. These red lines have been very deferring, very disturbing here. I should say that we should really stop thinking of that would these and these weapon systems now be responded by Russia by nuclear threats or whatever. We should give our best help at the moment. There were very bold suggestions in Finland too that, we have 220 Leopard 2s. Let's give half of them to Ukraine. But that isn't very helpful because we are really the front line. And these Leopard 2s have been more or less designated to our armored brigades and mechanized brigades. So we can't afford being 4 years without main battle tanks if it takes that long for German industry to produce new placements. So and now the Prime Minister actually suggested that since we are going to give up F-18 Hornets and the F-35s are coming to replace them, so what are we going to do with the should we scrap the old ones, the Hornets, or what should we do with them? But of course, it's a process when they are overtaking the F-35s, the F-18 Hornet. They are not going to be available in the next 2 years or so. 25 is the first F-35 coming to Finland, and it will take until 2030. But this sort of I think it was meant to be encouragement to other governments as well, who have really, which are not the frontline countries, who could actually afford giving them because their replacement is not in that acute need as they would be in Finland. So hopefully this year will be the decisive year to give enough of assets to Ukraine so that they could really. I don't think whether they can extend it to Crimea this year, but anyway to get Donbass liberated.
We probably shouldn't end without expressing our admiration for your Prime Minister, not simply as a personality, but as a symbol of younger, yet almost one wants to say better prospects for leadership in Europe, and it certainly gives us Americans a hopeful view of how the transatlantic partnership will prosper in the future, and welcoming Finland into the alliance has been a real affirmation of the effort that Americans have made for many years to try to preserve stability and peace across the continent.
Thank you, Giselle. We have a coalition government at the moment where 5 of the parties are led by ladies in their 30s. So very.
You have a lot of talent on the bench.
We all wish more of European countries were like Finland in so many ways. Admiral Juhani Kaskela, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about Finland's security challenges and Finland's help when it comes to European and Nordic security. From my friends, Dalibor Rohaj, Giselle Donnelly, and me, thank you for listening to the Eastern Front. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us. To stay up to date with the Eastern Front, please give us a follow on Twitter at Eastern Front Pod in one word, and sign up for our newsletter through the link included in the show notes. You can find more episodes and additional content on our website, ai.org, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, and until next time, goodbye.